Hey, everybody, I'm Jody Vance,
And I'm George-Affleck.
and it's time for.
Womp, 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 womp. Go Canucks. Unspun. Sorry, Jody.
I know I get COVID and the Canucks lose those two games. Oh,
That was
but
painful. I mean, that was painful.
it
I
was
mean, even
painful,
I was seeing that. Watch that.
right? And you're not the one with the ice and the pucks and the sticks thing. Um, well, you know what? To be honest with you, as soon as I heard that Brock Besser was out, the leading goal scorer for the Canucks, after we're already with our third string netminder, we have injuries on the team we don't even know about, and then Brock Besser goes out with a blood clotting issue. And no, you anti-vaxxers, it has nothing to do with that. They say that more often these clotting issues are happening with professional athletes because they go straight from playing super hard, dehydrated, and then they get on a plane. It's a perfect storm for clotting issues. So that's the science behind it. But as soon as I heard that Besser was out, I was like, oh man, that must be just.
Yeah.
But his health is most important. The good news today that I can tell you, George, because I know you're very into it, is that Rick Tocchet, the
Oh.
coach of the Vancouver Canucks,
Mhm.
has won the Jack Adams Award as the best coach of the year. It was just announced yesterday in a
So,
landslide. Rick Tocchet won.
so he's
So
not going to get fired?
no, no, you don't
That's
turn around. The Canucks weren't even supposed to make the playoffs this year. Never mind, take us to game 7 of round 2. I mean, I'm super sad. Even sadder that I have to sit next to a diehard Oilers fan later
I was going
today.
to say that. I was going
Oh,
to
the first segment is all about Linda and the Oilers. It's all about it. It's like it might go on, but we might not have any headlines today because of the gloating that's going to take place on Steel and Vance.
say.
So are you going to watch playoffs moving forward then, or
No, of
are you?
course not.
No.
Summer's
And
back. Give me a break.
right.
Like,
And
no,
everybody's like, so are you going to get on board with the Oilers this season? I'm like,
no.
no.
Hockey season's over. Moving
Yes.
on. I mean, I wasn't
Cool.
there anyways, but you know,
All right. But
I just
I'll root for Paul Maurice. I like Paul Maurice. He's a personal friend of mine, and he's the coach of the Florida Panthers. And I like the idea of watching him win. But am I going to change my plans to watch that hockey game? Probably not. Probably not.
no.
Anyways,
The weather being
let's.
so great, it's like
I
nope.
know. So let's get into some of the politics. What are we, like 5 months out of the provincial election here?
Mm.
And the polls are coming at us fast and furious,
Yeah,
George.
yeah.
And
It's
everything is
interesting.
showing that while the NDP have a very strong showing in the polls, that if the election were held today and it was the NDP versus the BC Conservatives versus the BC United Party, if all those three parties go up against one another, the NDP win a majority. Now, what do you think's going to happen?
Yeah, the
What are
Main
you
Street.
hearing?
Yeah, well, the Main Street poll came out. So there's two things that are interesting. And Joshua Hall from CKNW brought this up. One was that the overall poll, 30, and you could argue Main Street polls and with their whatever party, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But I feel like this is pretty accurate with the NDP at 34% and BC Conservatives at 32% and BC United at 12%, BC Greens at 8. So you put BCU and BCC together, the Conservative and the United together, you got 44%. That's a strong that's a strong showing. It's what has other polls that I've seen, private polls, are even stronger than that for the non-NDP vote. Like the vote against the NDP has been consistently for some months now stronger than the support. So it shows you that if there were an election held and there was one party up against the NDP, they would probably win. That was interesting. Though, let's get into that in a sec. But also the Surrey numbers that when they polled and it's their NDP or BC Conservatives are ahead overall against everybody. And we'll get into because I think that's related. And we've talked a lot about this, the policing, and I think this is related to the policing. South Asian vote is going very conservative. I think people are upset in Surrey because of this chaos, and so we'll get into that. But I think this is obviously this kind of polling and these kind of numbers, which is not the only poll that I've seen that shows these kinds of numbers. The right has to unite or divvy up the province. And I've heard rumors that those conversations are in serious mode right now, where they would look at 30 ridings and they wouldn't run competition. They would choose which ones, and that they would only run one candidate for BC United or one candidate for BC Conservatives, which would lead likely, my prediction, I've been saying this for a while, is probably a majority or minority coalition government between BC United and BC Conservatives, which I think would, whoever got the most seats will be the one who gets to be the leader, which would be either Rustad or, so it's going to be, interesting.
Or Kevin-Falcon. So similar for those who watch this and aren't as geeky and nerdy as we are about the politics, because we like to take the spin out. This would be similar to what we saw with the NDP Greens, right?
Yeah.
With John Horgan and Professor Weaver, right?
Yeah.
So that the thinking would be that they would both split the vote and then come together with a split vote, as opposed to amalgamating the two parties.
That's right. Or the NDP and Federal Liberals, same thing.
Right, federally, but just keeping it provincial so we don't confuse the people.
That's right. It would be a combo deal.
So there wouldn't be like, okay, we're folding all in to the conservative, the BC Conservatives, right?
I would think
that was the discussion. It's like, Kevin-Falcon, you should fold your tent at the BC United Party because your name change and the party platform has failed to garner or stimulate the attention that, otherwise would have helped him. Because you'd think that the quote unquote BC Liberals, who are now BC United or BC UP, if you talk to people in the NDP, they call them BC UP. Okay. Yeah, well, we had the Premier on and he said, well, BC UP. And I was like, oh, I don't think I've ever heard it put that way. But okay.
Is that some kind of derogatory term? I don't understand.
No, you said BCU and he said BCUP. Like, there's even confusion in the acronym is my point. Right?
Because they shouldn't have changed the name. Because they shouldn't have changed the name. That would have solved the problem.
We got breaking news. Sorry, you were just talking about Surrey. This from the Vancouver Sun. Surrey loses court bid to keep the RCMP. The Surrey police dispute is in its 19th month. Whether this will end the bitter fight is unclear. BC Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth has called a news conference for 11:45 today. So he's
if I were
Kevin-Falcon
or BC Conservative or John Rustad, I would be holding a press conference saying, I support the mayor. I just think that the movement is against this RCMP city of Surrey. I just think that
I'm just going to read this to you.
The data is clear. She's winning the war, the PR war.
Okay,
so go.
This is not my opinion. I'm reading this. This is a quote from a 27-page written decision from BC Supreme Court Justice Kevin Liu. Justice Liu said, regardless of whether the July 2023 decision was reasonable or within the minister's authority, the provincial legislature's exercise of its authority over the city in respect to policing through its enactment of the new legislation is valid. He said the provincial legislature is entitled to enact legislation even where its intention is to overcome a legal proceeding, as in this case.
And so the appeal
Brenda Locke loses in her bid in the BC Supreme Court.
So now she can take it all the way to the top. To what do you think her?
I don't know what the end game. She doesn't appear to be an individual who's ready to lay down her sword and kneel before the higher powers, if you will.
And she seems to be supported by enough counselors on that view.
Yeah, it depends. Again, back to the polling, and we can get back on track with that because that literally just hit my phone.
Yeah, no, it's relevant. It's totally relevant.
Yeah. Because people in Surrey are so fed up. It's not even that they're so fed up with Mike Farnworth or Brenda Locke. They feel helpless to stop the fighting other than to remove one of them. And there is no option to remove Brenda Locke in 5 months, but there is an option to remove Mike Farnworth from his position by replacing the government. Not necessarily once that other government, whoever they might be, if that were to come to pass, would necessarily change what Mike Farnworth is doing. They might say it on the campaign trail, woo, spin, and then get into office and be like, right, sorry, yeah, so we're gonna continue doing that. Right, we read the papers, and actually, that's the thing that I find so funny here. The fight will continue.
Yeah, I don't see any end to the Surrey thing, and I think in the end the RCMP will stay, and I think the coalition will happen. And
You think the RCMP will stay?
yes,
Really?
I think both the United and Conservatives are going. Unless unless the polling is totally unrelated to this dissatisfaction in Surrey about with the NDP, but it has to be related to that. Of course it does, and along with the crime issue and all those other things, inflation, everything. You need the Surrey vote. If you don't get the Surrey vote in the provincial election, you don't win. You don't win that. You don't win most of the region, in the valley. You don't win. If you don't get Surrey, you don't usually get Langley. You don't get anything else. So, as much as you might get NDP safe in Vancouver, when you get out to the valley, they're not, and they've got some weird ridings out there that they won't win again. And so you're looking at best case scenario for the NDP, I would say, is in a minority government, best case, but probably a
Right.
minority coalition.
But with a minority government, the NDP continues to make the transition to Surrey Police Services and RCMP's out.
Well, I think if they get a minority, maybe, yeah, maybe, yeah. Of course,
I don't see.
They seem committed to it.
I got no skin in this
No,
game.
they seem
I
committed
listen
to
to
it.
Linda a lot. I listen to you a lot. You guys are very different in how you see the situation, and I sit in the middle. And after sitting with Mike Farnworth and having off-camera conversations, like not off the record conversation, but off-camera conversations, and then on-camera conversation, is there any universe where this is reversed? No. Fait accompli. Done. It's actually written into legislation now that when you ask for a change in policing, you move forward with that change in policing. And Surrey did ask for the change. Like, all of this other noise aside, this is like taking out all the spin and the fighting and the politics and whatever. And you and I have talked ad nauseum about the number of people behind the scenes puppeteering here to try and damage the current provincial government, and for a host of reasons, I'm sure, that we are unaware of, all of them political. It's interesting to me to watch the everyday Joe Public person like myself, and in particular a Surrey resident, who might just be absolutely beyond exhausted with this whole process and where they land. Like, does a change in government add up to starting all over again with this? Because don't they shred all the documents at the legislature when it changes government? I heard that from when the Liberals changed to the NDP. I was like, so like, how long does it take you to read up on everything that's happened over the last however many decade more and some? And they're like, oh no, they shred everything.
I've never heard that before, but
oh really?
they probably shred a lot of stuff that's stuff. But no, they're not allowed to do that.
Well,
and that's I mean, they probably do shred stuff in real time all the time. But I would say that changing the legislation is not hard. The province just decides to do it. It's whatever, the new government can do whatever they want if it's not in place yet. So the question is, can this be strung along until October? And do the NDP really want that to happen? So whatever polling they're doing, I'm sure they're doing a ton of it in Surrey to see what are the issues, and is this the issue that's going to hurt them there, or is there something else that they need to focus on? Maybe on their polling they look great in this issue. It's really, that's the deep dive into the policing for the NDP is what they need to analyze and go, you know what, maybe we should just back off for 6 months.
Can we talk a little bit about how polling does or does not work? Right? Like, we've seen.
Depends on the poll.
Pardon?
It depends on the poll. We had the Christy Clark poll, the internal polls that they had, and I was privy to them the year nobody thought she would win and she won. And I went to a meeting and somebody showed me their polling and I'm like, what? Come on. This is their internal polling. And the exact number that happened in the election is what happened in that election where she got that majority, and nobody saw it coming. Nobody. So their internal polling, and quite often internal polling is much better because they do it differently.
How do they do it?
Well, they do more. They're very specific. They have different kinds of questions. It's not broad. It's like depending on the pollster.
Mostly by phone.
Mostly they do. Yeah, they try to do as much by phone, not email.
Yeah, because I've received a couple of those calls.
Yeah, so those are probably from internal pollings.
Yeah, and they ask you some really rando questions.
Yeah,
and then they ask you a specific one, and if you answer favorably to that individual leader, then all of a sudden it goes deeper, an inch wide and a mile deep.
Mhm.
and beforehand it's sort of big tent. What do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Should this money be spent on that? Oh, how do you feel about Christy Clark? Well, like Christy Clark's okay.
Right.
Okay, then
And you are in a very interesting riding, so you'll be getting different calls than I would. My ride, well, actually,
Yes.
my riding's pretty flippy floppy right now, but could go anyway. But I think it'll go BC Conservative United. But your riding is Eby, right?
Yep.
So he is very, very vulnerable, just as Christy Clark, who won that majority but lost that riding.
Yeah.
Weird that that would happen, but that is likely could happen for Eby this time. And
I
so,
think that the demographics have changed in the ridings that we traditionally have looked at and understood it. And I gave this some thought, and this is a layperson's opinion, so correct me if you like. I'm totally down with being corrected on this. When you were talking about, if you win Surrey and what Surrey and when you get to the valley and what the valley used to be a completely different animal than it is post-COVID, right? Massive numbers of families and working class people and white collar, blue collar. It used to be, the farmer. It used to be super blue. And
mhm.
now there are a lot of people who commute to downtown from, Langley, Abbotsford, Chilliwack that are deep in the valley. That, I mean, we see it. We see the hunger for transit because of it, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a demographic that's shifting and changing and flowing because of the unaffordability of downtown Vancouver as a whole. People who used to live down here, or people who then were priced out of Surrey. Surrey is a growing community, but the demographic in Surrey has shifted and changed as well, other than South Surrey.
Yeah, I don't know if that changes the vote though, because generally when people, so a lot of people I know in Yaletown move to Langley and to because get bigger places, and
Mm-hmm.
so and their families or they're growing families, so they're moving to the burbs. Generally, people who have once they have kids move to the right of the political spectrum. Certainly in Canada, it doesn't actually work that way in the States, but here in Canada, once you start having kids and you start making money, you stop voting left and you start voting right. And so all those people moving to the valley, along with the farmers, are right of center, and that's will be indicative in the polls. I think that so it doesn't change much. It hasn't even when I was a kid. I grew up in Langley, and it's
Yeah.
always conservative there, always, and still pretty much is.
We've spent 15 minutes talking just about this, and I'm going to keep talking about it because it's wildly fascinating to pick your brain about such things, because you have both represented as a politician, run municipally as a city councilor, and then you've run provincially, as well as doing crisis communications and PR. If people don't know, when you're watching George, because George_Affleck is so fabulous, you may not know that behind the scenes he is very, very brilliant when it comes to marketing and PR and crisis comms. So
Mhm.
you've done these, you've been privy to, you hear from, and you've got people that you can't even tell me stuff about the things that you know, which is, I mean, I poke at you to try and tell me stuff, but it's like, where is the Achilles heel for the polling that we're seeing and the idea of a coalition government on the right? Is it, again, I don't know the answer to this, and that's why I love doing this podcast with you. Is it a bit of an Achilles heel for the big picture that John Rustad of the BC Conservatives and Kevin-Falcon of BC United Party, when the two of them are saying, well, we'll just divvy up the regions and we'll just, we'll run different people in there and we'll do a coalition. We won't go against each other. We're going to come together. Might people look and say, you know what, that conservative candidate is like total anti-LGBTQ2 plus, anti-choice, all of these things that they just, won't even hold their nose and vote for conservative, even though they want more fiscal conservative politics for their bottom line, like you say, but are just like, no, I'm going to go with status quo because they got us through COVID and they're doing whatever. Because the NDP have moved more to the middle, have they not?
Yes, they have because of I mean, yes, Kevin-Falcon, he'll say that they're in the middle. I would say that what the reason I think that divvying up the province is probably what's happening is because they will choose those ridings based on what you're exactly describing. So
Okay.
we all vote for our local MLA. We don't vote for the
Yeah.
leader. The leader drives
Right.
the bus and has the
Right.
momentum and all those things. So when you vote locally, you vote for the candidate. So I'm not going to say which ridings might be the most likely that some of the conservative values fit into, and others where the BC United values might fit into. Those are the conversations that they're having probably right now, and thinking, okay, this community is definitely supportive of the conservative values. This one, not so much. So it protects both leaders from being pigeonholed into specific issues, because
Right.
you can say, and it doesn't
They
require.
made me do it.
Yeah,
Right.
you doesn't the adage, where where all boats float. That sort of cliche about when the tide comes in, you everybody wins. It doesn't work when this is happening. It's a bit of a mess. So you have two leaders that nobody seems to like for both those parties. Really, no, they're not. I mean, Kevin, we thought he would be more popular than he has been. John Rustad is not a prototypical kind of leadership candidate. He would admit that too.
Yeah.
So they're not.
Well, he did admit that on his
So they're not
Twitter
perfect,
feed last week.
But together
when he said, hell no, we won't.
Yes,
I'm not giving up what I built. And Kevin-Falcon, similar,
And he might, if hubris gets in his way, and ego, which is not uncommon in politics, then they're both screwed, and David-Eby is taking that to the bank. So I would say that.
So between now and the election, David-Eby is going to do his best to make those two fight.
I think what David-Eby is dealing with right now is he didn't think he'd have a tough ride here. He thought he was going to have an easy ride all till about a year ago. Or 6 months ago. And now he's going, oh crap. So now you're going to start seeing a lot of negative stuff. They can't be the happy party anymore. The way you win elections, if you are the underdog, is you find the negatives of your opposition. You've got to make them look like the devil. Otherwise you don't win. Because if you don't tell the people, nobody's going to.
Didn't somebody have like a big file of things that they wanted to accuse you of when you were running or something? Like,
oh yeah.
That's wild.
They were keeping videos of me saying things when they thought I was going to be running for mayor. They had a whole and I got this from people from the party that was, who after I left, they told me, oh yeah, we had a whole pile of stuff that we never got to use about you. And I thought
that's something. Can you imagine if all that energy was put towards solving problems?
Well, having run campaigns and successfully behind the scenes with focusing on the negative, it's a very successful strategy. I have not failed in that strategy when I've helped in campaigns.
I know.
It's
I'm so glad to have
you
in my back pocket as a good person, because then you'll never come at me like, well, I'm never running for government ever. Oh my gosh. Like watching City Hall. I was watching, was it Harrison Hot Springs? I think it was Harrison Hot Springs City Hall. I was like, I zoomed in to like the most, I thought I was tuning into The Young and the Restless, to be honest with you. Like, the way it was like performative. And I'm like, this is why I could never do it. They were fighting. They were arguing with the people. It was wild. Municipal politics is chaotic, to say the least, as we have discussed about,
although I just got my tax bill. I don't know if you did.
No.
My taxes have gone up like massively in the last two years.
Your property tax
and
on
my
your
property
house?
value hasn't gone up much.
No.
Yeah. I couldn't believe the latest one that came in. I just got mine in the email. I'm like, what?
Oh, I haven't got mine yet. Do you not defer
it's
your
up by
taxes now that you're
20%.
double nickels?
What's that?
You don't defer your taxes?
No, because Amanda's too young.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she's a youngie.
There you go. There you go, George. Okay, so I wanted to, so Robert Pickton,
yes,
the serial killer, was attacked in the Montreal prison, maximum security prison that he lives in. Now he's on medically induced coma, life support for the next number of days. They're going to try and wake him up in a few days, whatever. But apparently, like the story behind this, I don't know if you've been following along, kind of boggles my mind, because we were talking about the fact that Pickton was like applying for day parole.
Yeah.
And we're like, really? What? And then we're learning, I was listening to the Mike Smith show earlier today, and he had like a correctional officers union. Sorry, I don't know the proper acronym for it, but he was a fascinating guest with Mike, talking about how the internal system, pardon the pun, but handcuffs the prison guards and workers. The inmates are running the asylum to to use
The
an
ultimate
outdated
cliche.
term, right? Because it's like the rules are so outdated because you're not allowed to put anybody in solitary anymore because that's against your human rights. So everybody is housed with others. And so a guy like Robert Pickton has a big old target on his back, or in this case, apparently his head, because this violent offender that he's housed with
Yeah.
came at him and almost killed him with a broom handle. And then now there's no punishment for that guy. He's back in the same place that he was. Picton's in hospital, and there's no consequence for anybody internally because the rules in there are so archaic, which brings me back to BC, where the big story is about, drones dropping cell phones and drugs and, it's a delivery service. It's like skip the dishes or DoorDash for, illegal things. And you're not the guards there are not allowed to stop it because it's against the human rights of the prisoners for you to block their cell service.
Yeah.
Like
What is this is happening? Why? And you also, I think before you say someone, they're not even allowed to put a net over the facility to
No,
stop these.
I asked Alana Kelly from Glacier Media did a really great story on this, on the drones that deliver. Cause you're like, how does everybody get a cell phone? How do they not know? I can't get cell service at the lake. Where's my human right of having, but no, but at the prison you can get, you should be able to block that. You should be able to find your phone, identify who has one, take it away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I asked Alana, like, why don't they just put a net that stops the drugs from being dropped into the yard where the packages are delivered to the prisoners? And she's like, well, that's against their human rights. They're not allowed to do that.
How?
I don't
It's a net.
know.
You could get hurt with something falling from the sky. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. No, it's my heroin. Sorry.
How does
No, it's
that
my crack.
work, George?
No, it's my shiv. No, it's my cell phone. It's like, stop the things from
It's my
falling
new
from the
SIM
sky.
card, baby. It's my new SIM card, so I can do my deliveries internally
It's my
for the
gun. Who knows what they're dropping into these
weapons,
places, right? It's ridiculous.
Totally. Where does that end? Right?
Well, I think we've just gone too far. We've seen it with drugs in BC. You were mentioning earlier about Ontario. And
let's talk about that.
like,
after what's happened here in BC, like barely even the sizzle off the hot headline, and boom, Ontario goes to the feds and
you're on
says,
fire today with your lines.
thanks. I'm going to take that. They go to the feds and they say, would you please help us help the people and decriminalize hard drugs, illicit drugs? And the feds were like, no. And Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, goes, thank you to the feds for saying no. And I'm like, who is asking the feds to decriminalize all of Ontario if the Premier's not doing it? Like,
it's hello, we just did that here and it didn't go very well. So
no,
it's
such an upside down world right now. I don't even know.
Don't worry, the new party in power in Canada and BC will solve everything, whoever that might be.
I listened to Question Period before coming on here with you.
Yes.
And Pierre Poilievre had a script in front of him or memorized in his head that he said in English and French and English and French and English and French over and over and over and over. The answer to every question was the same. It was the absolute, it's wild. There's no policy.
I've talked about this.
You have.
You only say one or two things. You just say them slightly different ways, and that's all you ever say in politics.
Yeah,
when you're running.
When he spoke in French, he called it the Liberal Bloc Consortium. No, he didn't use that word. The
consortium. Really?
It was like and then when he did it in English, he called it the NDP Liberal government. So he called it the Bloc Liberal when he spoke in French, just basically blaming the two other parties for, because then the Liberals would stand up and say, you were literally the Minister of Housing, did nothing, didn't mention homelessness once. Homelessness and the issues around homelessness went up when you were in charge. They kept coming at him, and he kept standing up and saying, when will this Liberal NDP government admit that they're so busy feeding their bloated government that they're, starving the Canadian? And I was just like, It's been going on for 10 minutes.
How you win.
Same
That's how
thing.
you win.
And win what? Then they just get in and go, oops. Oopsies. Can't fix it.
Jody, you
It's
seem
too
like you're being
broken.
very naive today about politicians.
I
don't
want
know
our
what's
viewers.
going on with you. Are you like, you're like everything's just, can't we just all get along? Kumbaya world. Suddenly, what has happened to you? Come on. Have we not talked for 257 episodes?
I'm not kumbaya. I just want somebody to tell me how some of these horrifying things that are happening to our societies, not just here in BC, not just across the country, but across the world, are going to be addressed. Government is sliding down a razor blade into a nightmare. And it's just like watching what's going on in the US.
What
is
does
like,
that even mean? Sliding down a razor blade to it.
my stepdad used to I say, how you doing, Bruce? He go, oh, sliding down the razor blade of life. Like, I know.
Ouch.
I know. Yeah, terrible. It's painful, isn't it?
I don't even want to think about that.
I know. Sorry.
Yeah, we gotta go. I've had
okay.
enough. You've
That's
killed me
it.
with these cliches and these made up cliches that your dad says.
I'm gonna call it long COVID. It's brain fog. I'm still like sleeping like, yeah.
Poor Jody.
I know.
Your first case of COVID.
Yeah, it was. Okay, here's the statement from Public Safety Minister and Solicitor General Mike Farnworth. We'll end on this. I'm reading it cold, so forgive me. Here's the statement, the minister's statement on Surrey policing judicial review. Mike Farnworth, Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, has released the following statement. Following the favorable decision in the Surrey Police Transition Judicial Review legislation, quote, people in Surrey want this to be over. I am hopeful that today's ruling is the time to come together to complete the transition to the Surrey Police Service. The safety of people in Surrey and across British Columbia has always been my main priority. Every action I have taken has been rooted in ensuring safe and effective policing so that when people call 911, help is on the way. This ruling helps to provide certainty for the future of policing in Surrey, and I look forward to continuing that work. End quote. End of the release.
Problem solved. Story over.
See, there we go. Fixed it.
The mayor of Surrey is just going to go, okay, good job.
I don't think
we'll talk next week about the repercussions of that statement because there will be some.
Right. So follow along on our social media. You can find this fabulous individual at George_Affleck, George_Affleck on your Twitter. I'm at Jody Vance, Jody with a Y, at Jody Vance on Twitter. And we're on the TikTok, we're on the Instagram. You can follow along, but honestly, UnSpun podcast every Thursday. Like and subscribe if you're listening to us. You can also watch this if you want to see us looking crazy while we're talking, because it's pretty funny. Yeah, that's pretty much our deal. That's all I got.
Bye-bye.